And chapter 21 in the Smart Sales System is centered around getting around gatekeepers. And this is a really important area to talk about because if you do phone prospecting, about 50% of the time you spend prospecting can be spent dealing with gatekeepers. Gatekeepers can be difficult. We're going to talk about that here today. And if you can just simply improve your skill set and your competency of dealing with gatekeepers and understanding them and having some tools in your toolkit for how to get around them, if you can do those things, you will immediately improve your sales results because it's going to impact such a large percentage of your prospecting time. So we're going to talk about how to do that today. We're going to talk about Gatekeeper Tactics, real things you can do to get around gatekeepers. These are real tactics that you can implement. I won't say that they work 100% of the time. You might not agree with all of the tactics that I'm giving you, but the good news is that what I will share with you today are real things you can do. So if you agree with them and you want to try them, these are things you can implement regardless of your sales skills, your educational background, your personality style. These are real things you can do. So my suggestion would be listen to these, and there might be one or two that you can take. Maybe you like them all. Maybe they can give you some ideas of different things you can do. But we will talk about real tangible tactics that you can use for getting around gatekeepers. We will talk about gatekeeper objections that you're going to face and how you can respond to those. And we're going to just briefly talk about two different types of gatekeepers that you face. And we'll wrap up with a little bit of a few thoughts on your mindset with what you're thinking when you deal with gatekeepers. And so let's just get started, jump right in and talk about some gatekeeper tactics. And the first one is to take a step back and try to understand the gatekeeper. As you've seen with just about all the chapters of the Smart Sales System, when we're talking about a different area, the first step is to take a step back and try to understand the other person that you're either trying to deal with, trying to sell to, trying to deal with an objection from. The first thing to understand about gatekeepers is that in the same way that if you're a salesperson, you've been given a quota, you maybe been assigned the task of getting into and selling to particular accounts or into a territory. And so it's your goal to get into an account. And in the same way that you have that goal, many situations, a gatekeeper has the exact same goal. Actually, let me back up. Has the exact opposite goal, which is to keep you out. And said another way is their goal is to keep salespeople out. The people that are behind them, that they are playing the role of gatekeeper for, might most likely do not want to be bothered or deal with cold calls from salespeople that are trying to sell something. So they will instruct that gatekeeper to screen calls. And if it's a salesperson trying to sell something, they will be instructed to get rid of that salesperson. And in the same way that you might go through training, such as training like this, to get into new accounts, to cold call, to deal with objections, gatekeepers are often trained on how to identify which calls are coming from salespeople and how to get rid of them. It's not as complex of training as you might go through in terms of sales training, but they're definitely given instructions on this is what salespeople look like. These are ways to get them to self-identify themselves. For example, gatekeepers will be taught, hey, when you think it's a salesperson, ask them what the call is in regards to. Most likely what they say will allow you to identify that it's a salesperson. When you do identify it as a salesperson, do not let them in. Get rid of them. Not only are they instructed to get rid of salespeople, but you could kind of look at it as though they're going to look bad when a salesperson slips past them. So if somehow they aren't able to identify that someone is a product-pushing, annoying, pesky salesperson, and that person slips past them and gets to someone in the organization, say a decision maker, and ends up on the phone with that person, the gatekeeper can look bad. Either look bad in terms of reputation or job performance or be reprimanded. It's their job to keep you out. And so when you add up all those factors, the gatekeeper naturally takes the adversarial role to a salesperson. You're trying to get in, they're trying to keep you out. So this immediately creates a level of conflict. In most scenarios, if you're successful, then they are being unsuccessful. And when they're successful, you're not being successful. So this is really important for you to understand. The other thing is that most likely a lot of the gatekeepers that you're dealing with, their job is not really rewarding and a lot of fun, and it could be really hectic. A gatekeeper might be a receptionist, and they're dealing with a lot of different incoming that they have to juggle and deal with. The phone's ringing, deliveries are being delivered, guests are needing to be checked in, questions are being asked. It's just nonstop. And while you may enjoy selling, most salespeople enjoy selling, and you might enjoy closing deals and making money, often gatekeepers don't have that level of satisfaction in their job. This may come through when you have to deal with them. So not only are they doing everything they can to keep you out, they just might not be a bundle of fun to deal with day in and day out. So these are just some things that you might agree with some of them, you may disagree with some of them, but the goal here is try to understand the person that you're dealing with. And so one thing you can take from that is that if they are assigned with keeping pesky product pushing salespeople out, the worst thing you could do is sound like a salesperson that's trying to sell something when you're talking to a gatekeeper. The more you can minimize that, the less resistance that you will face when dealing with gatekeepers. Another tactic is to try to enlist their help. Now, this refers to if the gatekeeper is your adversary and basically on the other side of the negotiation table, meaning it's a zero-sum game and only one person's going to win, and you're going against them head-to-head, one thing you could do is to try to get on the same side of the table as they are by trying to enlist their help. By the way, this doesn't work necessarily when you're already in confrontation mode where someone's trying to get rid of you, a gatekeeper is trying to get rid of you already. This is a tactic you use more proactively. So you'll try this before dealing with resistance. You're trying to enlist their help in terms of trying to help you with where you are and where you're trying to go. So an example of this might be a gatekeeper answers and you might say something like, I'm not sure who I'm supposed to talk to. Maybe you can help point me in the right direction. I usually deal with someone in finance. A lot of times I either talk to a director of finance or a controller. Can you help point me in the right direction? And so what I'm doing there is I'm trying to enlist their help to point me in the right direction. It's just a slight modification from asking a gatekeeper, hi, can you connect me with a controller? It's just a slight modification there, and you're basically asking for their help and enlisting their help so that maybe they can help get you where they're going in the right direction. And it's just that subtle change that might make them decrease their guardedness and help you versus triggering their guard and blocking you out right away. One of the most helpful gatekeeper tactics that we'll talk about here today is to treat the gatekeeper like the prospect. And you're not going to want to do this out of the gate. This is like your fallback position. So when you're calling it into an account, you're on the phone with the gatekeeper, they're starting to block you out. Either they're blocking you out because they sense you're a salesperson and they're not going to let you in or let anybody in, or they might be being difficult because they just don't know who you are and who to send you to, and they're just confused and you're confusing them with what you're asking for. Maybe you don't have an exact contact name. So basically the picture I'm trying to paint is you try to get in or try to get transferred and you're facing some resistance. Well, what you can do is you can start to shift gears, because let's face it, if you were passed along and transferred through to the prospect, you might use some of your call script or some of your sales message, and you might do something like share your value proposition, ask some questions, talk about your product or whatever. You're going to go through some sort of routine when you talk to the prospect. Well, if you can't get through, you're being blocked out, you're facing some resistance, take a step back and start to treat the gatekeeper like the prospect that you're trying to reach. And let me show you don't worry, I'm going to show you exactly what this looks like. So a first example here is you could share your value points. This really works well if the gatekeeper doesn't know who you should talk to or why you should talk to anyone. So you're starting to face some resistance, and it might look something like this. Actually, let me take a step back real quick and let you know who I am and why I'm calling. The reason for my call is that I work with CFOs and I help them to streamline their global reporting for their financial accounts. I don't know if you all want to improve that area, but that's why I'm reaching out. Do you know who the best person for me to talk to is? So what I did there is it's the value points building block, but I'm facing resistance and we're starting to butt heads, and here I am, I'm like pushing pause, taking a step back, and I'm educating the gatekeeper in the same way that I'd educate the prospect by sharing my value proposition. It not only tells the gatekeeper why you should be passed through because you're sharing your value and how you can help, it educates them on maybe who you should talk to. So another version of that is you could try to educate the prospect with your pain points. So again, you're facing resistance, and actually, let me take a step back real quick and let you know why I'm calling. The reason for my call is that I work with a lot of CFOs, and they often have challenges with finding a lot of errors in their reports, and it takes a lot of time to reconcile their different global accounts. Now, I don't know if you guys are concerned about those areas, but that's why I'm reaching out. Do you know who the best person to talk to is, or do you know if you guys are, if your CFO is concerned or not about those areas? Let me just point out, what you're trying to do here is you're not necessarily trying to get the gatekeeper to say, oh, we need that. Oh, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I'm so glad you called. We're waiting for someone for that. You're trying to educate them and trying to get them to drop their guard just a little bit. You're trying to sound more sophisticated, and that you're not a pesky salesperson, and show that you have something valuable to offer versus just some product to push. Another version of this educate attempt is to use your name drop building block. So this might look like, actually, let me take a step back, let you know who I am and why I'm calling. The reason for the call is that we worked with XYZ Corp, and we helped them to streamline their global financial reporting, and this ultimately helped them to reduce the amount of time that it takes to run their reports and also improve the accountability for their individual business units. Now, I don't know if we can help you guys in the same way, and that's why I'm reaching out. Do you know who the best person for me to talk to is? And so again, hopefully there you might get pointed in the right direction. You might get some kind of dialogue going with the gatekeeper. We have a couple options here. We're continuing with treating the gatekeeper like the prospect, but another option is to start asking questions. So this works well when you have a difficult gatekeeper, and you might just kind of give up with trying to get to the prospect and just say, oh, okay, well, I tell you what, maybe you might know the answer to this. Do you guys currently have your reporting integrated with your ERP system? So right there, I'm just asking one of my pre-qualifying pain questions. Again, your goal here is not necessarily to get the gatekeeper to say, oh, we need that. But what you'll find here is you're probably going to get one or two different types of responses. Either the gatekeeper might answer your question, and that's good, because if it's a really good question that you'd like to ask the prospect, well, heck, if you can get some information out of the gatekeeper, then that is not a call wasted. Maybe the gatekeeper might answer your question, which helps you to determine that the prospect needs what you sell, or maybe the gatekeeper answers your question and it could sound like a credible answer, and it helps you to identify that you don't really need to waste your time calling this prospect because they don't fit. If the gatekeeper tells you an answer where it helps you to identify that there's a fit, you can then follow that up with, oh, well, see, that's why I'm reaching out, because that's the type of thing that we help with, and we could probably have a really productive conversation with your CFO. Can you help point me in the right direction of who that is, or are you able to transfer me? I think that they would really find our conversation to be productive. So you basically use the information gathered to justify them passing you through if they are indeed being difficult. Now, certainly they may still just block you out, and you might, again, like I said, there's some gatekeepers where regardless of what you do, they're not going to let you in, and that's fine. But at least when you face some resistance, if you have this tool in your toolkit, then you have something that you try before getting completely shut down. Now, there is a chance that you ask your pain question here, and the gatekeeper they don't know. And that could very likely be the case if you have a really great pain question to ask, and it's the prospect that would know the answer to that. And so the gatekeeper might answer with something like, I'm not sure. I'm not the person that would know the answer to that. And then you could reply with something like, oh, well, you see, that's why I'm trying to get in touch with your CFO. They're the ones that really know the answer to that, and that's why I'm trying to reach out. Who is the best person for me to talk to about that? So again, you're treating the gatekeeper like a prospect, asking you a paying question. Depending on their answer, you have some sort of follow-up there to try to stay in the game and get around the gatekeeper. And another very related scenario to that is, instead of asking your pain questions, you could ask some of your current environment questions. So the gatekeeper says, we already use someone for that, or we don't need that, or we're not interested. Oh, okay, yeah, hey, well, I tell you what, maybe you might be able to answer this for me. Who are you guys currently using today for your reporting business intelligence platform? So what I did there is I'm being shut down by the gatekeeper, being blocked out, and I basically treat them like the prospect and respond with asking a current environment question. Same scenario there in terms of the answers. Depending on the answer, you have a few different options for how to respond and try to work your way around. So that is treating the gatekeeper like the prospect, and some of those are actually just very similar to the objection handling responses that we discussed in the last chapter. So not a lot of new content that I'm giving you there that you have to remember. Those are objection handling responses. What you would change is kind of the intro sentence. So you might add something like, okay, well, let me take a step back and let you know why I'm calling. And then everything after that is the objection response that we've already provided you. So the only thing additional you're learning there is, oh, well, let me take a step back and tell you why I'm calling. And then there's maybe the follow-up question there at the end is something new to add to your objection response. The next gatekeeper tactic is to display some sort of social proof. So social proof is basically displaying that you're connected to people in the organization. Social proof means you know people, right? So social proof in a social setting, like at a party, would be the hosts. Or at a bar, a club means you're a VIP, and the doorman and the bartenders and the people with bottle service. You know people. And if you have social proof, you have a lot of credibility, and people are a lot more open to working with you. And that applies in the B2B setting, and you can apply this concept to gatekeepers, because if gatekeepers think you are an outsider who's not connected to the organization, and you're trying to get in order to sell your product and push your product and bug people, then they're going to try to keep you out. But if you are able to demonstrate that you're connected, you're already on the inside, and yes, you might be a business person, consultant, advisor, salesperson that represents a company or a product or service, but if you're already connected and involved in the account, then maybe not only is it okay to let you in, but it might be inappropriate to completely shut you down. Meaning, if you're already involved with one department and you're calling in to talk to another department, and if the gatekeeper is a total jerk to you and just kicks you out and blocks you out, they might look bad because you're already doing business with the organization. So it buys you a ticket into the organization, or gets you around a difficult gatekeeper. So what that might look like is, you're talking to a gatekeeper. A proactive way to use this would be to name drop someone else in the organization that you know or that you're working with. So you might say something like, yeah, I've been speaking with Martha Martinez in accounting, and now we're trying to meet with someone on the HR side, and I'm not sure who to speak with. Do you know who the VP or director of HR is? Can you point me in the right direction? So what I did there is I just name dropped Martha in accounting to establish social proof, and to use that to buy my ticket into HR and basically decrease the guardedness of the gatekeeper. Now that's proactive, like out of the gate, I'm throwing the name drop out there. You could just say, yes, I'm trying to reach the director of HR. And if they say, may I ask what this is in regards to, so they're starting to screen you, then you could say something like, oh yeah, well sure. The reason for my call is I worked with Martha Martinez in accounting, and we're trying to follow up that meeting with a discussion with HR, and I just don't know the name of the person over there, so I'm hoping you can point me in the right direction. So that was the reactive sort of name drop. This is pretty powerful. You may say, I love it, but the common response to that is, well, what if you haven't spoken to anyone yet, and you're just trying to get into a new account cold? And it's a valid concern. But I have a little workaround for you, and I will tell you, we do not teach you to manipulate, to mislead in any way. We teach you real sales tactics that you can use without really like trying to lie or cheat. But I'm going to share with you kind of play on words here, which is, let's say that we did not meet with Martha Martinez, but we know that Martha Martinez is the accounts payable manager. We know her name, but we don't know who the name of the HR director is. We could say something like this: well, the reason why I'm reaching out is we are planning to meet with Martha Martinez in accounts payable, but before we do that, we need to meet with the HR director. Can you point me in the right direction of who that is? So what I said there is we are planning to meet with Martha Martinez in accounts payable. It's kind of a play on words, because you could plan to meet with someone without having a meeting on the calendar. It's your 100% intentions to meet with Martha Martinez. You don't have a meeting on the calendar, but it is your plan to meet with her. So it's not being dishonest, but it could easily be heard as that you have a meeting on the calendar with Martha Martinez, establishing social proof and buying you credibility. Something to test and try. The next tactic is to mention an initiative. So this is another way to kind of establish credibility and appear like you're already aware and engaged with the organization. So let's say that you did some research on a company and you learned that they had an initiative to consolidate their 3 supply chain management software systems into one. You read that in a press release. And now you're calling into IT and you're getting some resistance from a gatekeeper. They say, what's this in regards to? Oh, well, the reason for my call is I was calling to talk to the director of IT and get some details regarding the initiative of supply chain software consolidation. So you mention an initiative. It's kind of similar to mentioning a name drop. You're basically establishing credibility. So give it a shot. Some scenarios it could work. You could either use it proactively or reactively. Proactively would be just throwing it out there before you face resistance. Now, you may say, well, okay, that sounds logical or decent, but what if I don't know of any initiatives? You could also just throw out a very common initiative. If you don't have like a very specific initiative to mention, you could say something like, there's initiatives that are pretty either consistent from organization to organization, or initiatives that sound realistic to a gatekeeper, such as cost reduction, labor optimization, cost of goods sold minimization. Just kind of grab some accounting terms and throw minimization, optimization around it, and just say and mention that as an initiative that you're calling to meet with them about, talk to them about. That's the purpose of your call. Another tactic is to try to befriend the gatekeeper. This isn't a stretch or completely revolutionary idea, but the more you can kind of become a friend of the gatekeeper, the less resistance, reluctance, and rejection that you can face. So how can you do that? Well, I'll tell you one thing is that if you just try to smile while you're talking to the gatekeeper, that will modify your tonality and how you sound, and that could very directly impact how you're received. So if you're prospecting, you may feel stressed out. You may have just dealt with a difficult gatekeeper before talking to the gatekeeper you're dealing with, and you're tense. And odds are you're probably not smiling. Well, if you force a smile, even just a fake smile, have a mirror in front of you on your desk and smile while you're talking to the gatekeeper, even maybe laugh in kind of like laugh at yourself in certain situations and add humor. You can create a more friendly atmosphere with the gatekeeper, and little touches like catching their name and using their name after you're able to find out what their name is and build that relationship can improve your ability to get around gatekeepers. Dealing with a gatekeeper is an adversarial type of relationship, right? You're on opposite sides of the negotiating table with usually a zero-sum game being played. And like I said, there are some that there's nothing you can do to get around them. One last fallback position could be to share that you understand them. So the first thing I talked about was understanding the gatekeeper. Now I want to talk about sharing with them that you understand them. Let's say you're in a stalemate situation. They're not letting you pass and you're not giving up or you're not ready to walk away yet. You could share that you understand what's going on with them in a last-ditch effort to try to get around them with something like this. I understand the situation you're in. You get calls all day from salespeople, and it's your job to not let bothersome salespeople through. I just want to let you know that I am not one of those annoying, pesky salespeople. I will be really very respectful of the CFO's time, and there's a very good chance that we can have a very productive conversation because we reduce a tremendous amount of time for CFOs. We can reduce the errors in their reports, and that is usually something that they're very interested in, and it's very helpful to a CFO. And I think that the CFO at your company would probably find it to be very helpful. So is there any way you can either let me know who that person is or point me in the right direction or share with me the best way to connect with that individual? So just an example there of taking a step back and sharing with them that you understand, because what basically the sharing of the understanding there is that you're telling them you know what they're doing, that they're blocking you out, and that it's their job to keep you out. So that, and when they start to feel understood instead of feeling attacked, they might begin to decrease their guard a little bit. And the last gatekeeper tactic is just to try to avoid the gatekeeper altogether. So one of the best ways to do this is just to make your calls at a time when the gatekeeper will not be at their desk. So this can often be calling before 8 a.m., between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., which is the lunch hour, or calling after 5 p.m. Now, of course, if you are a salesperson, you can't just stop and make all your calls at those odd off-peak hours. But if you have called someone a few times and you're dealing with a difficult gatekeeper and you can't seem to get around them, make a task on your calendar to try back at an off hour. And if that's a front desk receptionist or an executive assistant, there's a good chance that maybe someone else will answer the phone, or if you have a direct dial and your direct dial is being for your target contact is being routed to a gatekeeper, in the off hours is when they might answer the phone for themselves. Either they're in the office early and the phone rings and they answer it, they don't know who it is. They're at their desk working during lunch and they answer the phone. It's another thing for you to try. So let's talk a little bit about the gatekeeper objections. Now, we talked in detail about objections in the last chapter of the Smart Sales System, and these objections that I show you will be from that, which is, and we already discussed these. So one of the most common objections for a gatekeeper is, what is this in regards to? Gatekeepers ask this objection to get salespeople to self-identify themselves as a salesperson calling to try to sell something. Because if a salesperson honestly answers this question, what their call is in regards to is they're calling to introduce themselves, they're calling to introduce their product, their company, they're calling to have schedule an appointment, they're calling to learn about what the needs are of that contact or that business, they're calling to see if that prospect needs what they sell, and so on. So if a gatekeeper says what's this in regards to, and if you answer honestly, directly with anything like that, the gatekeeper will know, okay, this is someone that not only is it okay for me to tell them to go away and not let them in, but this is someone that I need to, because if I let them through and they try to sell to the people behind me that I'm the gatekeeper for, I can get in trouble. So a very common objection, and one that you need to be prepared for, is this a sales call? It's the exact same objection, just in a different wrapping. We are not interested. So this is a very quick response from gatekeepers. By the way, I am sure you feel the same way as I do. This is an extremely frustrating objection, because when a gatekeeper says we're not interested, they don't even have the knowledge or right to make that determination, right? You know, they hear about what you sell or what company you're with, and then they quickly say we're not interested. They don't even know what you sell. They don't know. They aren't not in a position to make that decision, yet they will throw this at you. So it's one that you need to be prepared for. We are already using someone for that. We do not need that right now. Send me your information. So gatekeepers and prospects love the send me your information. This is a very easy way to get rid of salespeople, in a very polite way, because what the gatekeeper or prospect is doing is they're giving the salesperson a little bit of hope. They might say something like, "Oh, I'll tell you what, send me your information and I'll pass it along." The salesperson then has a little bit of hope that they might have an opportunity, and that the gatekeeper is going to be kind enough to pass along the information. So then the salesperson ends the call, spends 20 minutes of their time putting together the most well wordsmith email and sends it over, where the gatekeeper then deletes it without even looking at it. So the worst thing you could do in that scenario is to let the call end and then spend your valuable time putting together your information. We basically talked about all of these objections in the last chapter, so in terms of how to respond. So I'm not going to repeat that. You can pretty much actually use the exact same responses, which with all of these you can pretty much deflect to different building blocks. So you can deflect to your value points, your pain questions, your current environment questions, and that was all discussed in the chapter on dealing with objections. The only thing that you would change with these is that if a prospect answers one of your questions where they're signaling that there might be pain, or then you could use that to justify closing for an appointment with something like this. "Oh, well, that's one of the reasons why I'm reaching out. Based on that, it might make sense to talk in more detail because that's what we help with," and then you close for the appointment. With the gatekeeper, you're not going to close for the appointment, because you're not trying to schedule an appointment with the gatekeeper, and you're not trying to schedule an appointment with the gatekeeper for the target prospect. You're trying to get around the gatekeeper. So if the gatekeeper gives you an answer to a pain question or current environment question that either signals that they maybe have pain, or that the gatekeeper doesn't know the answer, or the gatekeeper doesn't know if there's pain or not, then you use that as justification to get past the gatekeeper. So it looks something like this. "Oh, I see. Well, that's one of the reasons why we probably could have a very productive conversation with Mary or Tom or the CFO, or and because that's an area that we help with, and honestly, I think that they would find that conversation to be very productive. What's the best way for me to get in contact with them?" So you responded to the objection with your pain question. You got kind of a pain answer, and you used it to try to get around the gatekeeper and try to get through them. And you could do something similar if the gatekeeper doesn't know. "Oh, I understand. Well, that's why I'm trying to reach Mark, because he likely would know all the details around that, and that's what we're trying to talk to you guys about. What's the best way for me to get in contact with Mark?" So again, to see the exact responses to these objections, just refer back to the chapter on objections, and the only thing you really change for is what you try to close for after you deflect to one of your building blocks. I want to talk about two different types of gatekeepers, and it's important to know these because they're fairly different, and how you kind of deal with them and how you should anticipate them dealing with you can be different. So being aware of the two different types is fairly helpful. The first type is front desk receptionists, and these are usually an employee that works in the lobby or entryway of a building or a business, and they answer the phone and receive packages and check in guests. And sometimes when you call a main number, you will end up talking to someone like this. These gatekeepers are distinct from the second type that I'll share with you, in that they usually have a decent level of who is who, so they can tell you who you need to talk to. But this gatekeeper will just kind of know people in terms of their title and organizational structure, but they won't have a deep level of knowledge of the organization and what's going on at the company. They'll just kind of know the organizational landscape, again, of titles and who's who. This type of gatekeeper will usually screen very hard and not really factor in what you say. So they'll pretty much, as soon as they figure out that you're a salesperson trying to sell something, or that you're a salesperson at all, they're probably going to try to get rid of you, and they really won't take into consideration really what you would communicate as your justification for getting through. So you really just want to avoid sounding like a salesperson to these types of individuals, and these probably are the more difficult gatekeeper to deal with, and can be the more infuriating, and the ones that just kind of are less pleasant and get rid of you without really giving you a chance. I bring those gatekeepers up primarily to talk about the second type. I mean, the whole reason for talking about the two types is really so we can talk about the second type of gatekeeper, and that is executive assistants. And these are typically individuals not working in the front desk, although they may sit in at the front desk during the lunch hour. But these are typically people that work in a department and support an executive and leadership team. For example, I've been using CFOs. So a CFO usually will have an executive assistant, and that assistant will answer their phone, often read their email, could also play an assistant role to other leaders, managers in the finance department, such as the VP of Finance, Director of Finance. And this person can also support, from an administrative role, employees in the department. So financial analysts would go to the executive assistant to the CFO for maybe ordering office supplies or whatnot. Now, the reason why I separate these out is that you often think of gatekeepers as an obstacle, but executive assistants could actually be an ally, and a very, very productive and valuable resource that you can leverage. And the reason why is because executive assistants usually have very deep knowledge of what is going on in the organization. Not just who is who in terms of title, but they often sit in meetings and take notes and are on conference calls and know about initiatives and pain points and problems and challenges. What that means is that not only are there situations where you can get a lot out of an executive assistant if you try to flip it, treat them like a prospect, but there are even times where you might want to just start with treating an executive assistant like the prospect. Once you end up on the phone with them, just try to have a short Q&A, quick call with them to learn more before even trying to get to the prospect, because they have so much valuable knowledge. The other thing is that this is a usually more sophisticated type of individual, meaning they've been at the company for a while, they've worked their way up, and that means a couple things. One is they'll have a better composure with dealing with you, and they might listen to you a little more. So when they definitely aren't going to just let frivolous, pesky sales calls, cold calls, salespeople through to bug people in their organization, but they may actually just be more inquisitive about who you are before letting you go. And if you do try to make your case by educating them, then they might hear you out, and before screening you out, they might make a decision on, who you are and if you're worth letting in, which is another reason why it's really important to have a good sales message, communicate clearly, and educate the person on who you are, why it would make sense for the person they're playing a gatekeeper for to try to let you in. When you treat this person like a prospect, these can be, as I mentioned, very productive conversations. Also, when you treat this gatekeeper like a prospect, you'll build more rapport because, sometimes they may feel like they're in a lower level in the organization because they're an executive assistant. But when you show them respect, where you understand the value that they have and you treat them like a prospect, they will really appreciate that. And so when you talk to them and you ask them questions, you might actually find out very valuable information in the form of they may give you information that allows you to disqualify the prospect from someone you should waste your valuable time calling. For example, let's say you solve some particular problem and you start talking to the executive assistant about it, you identify it's a problem they've already fixed. Well, that's great. Move on. You can save your time and go find a different prospect that still has that problem. The executive assistant might also find a better person for you to talk to, meaning you might have the CFO down and that's who you're trying to reach. But when talking to the executive assistant, you find out that the way their organization is structured, it's actually a different person that you're going to want to talk to, and they could save you a whole bunch of time and get you going in the right direction. So executive assistants are very valuable resources that you can and should leverage and that you will encounter when you're cold calling. The last thing I want to talk about is just kind of your mindset. And this is important because, as I mentioned, you could spend maybe half your prospecting time dealing with gatekeepers. And I already talked about that. Gatekeepers are your adversary and they can be difficult. Sometimes there's nothing you can do to get around them. Sometimes they can be unpleasant. So that can wear on you, especially if you get shot down. And so it's important to really, when you get shot down and rejected by gatekeepers, an initial feeling could be that you take it personally. Like if, let's say a gatekeeper hangs up on you, right? How does that feel? Even knowing it doesn't physically hurt, they hung up the phone, but you're not damaged anyway, but it hurts a little. You take it personally. And you take it personally because you feel like you're not doing a good job. And one thing that I want you to kind of keep in mind is when the gatekeeper rejects you, it really has nothing to do with you. It's not because of how you sound or what you said or what you look like. They're not rejecting you and you as a person. If anything, they are rejecting your company and your product. They're saying, we don't need what you sell, and so I'm not going to send you through. The reality is that most of the time the gatekeeper really hasn't even thought that far. They don't even really know whether they need your product or not. They're just doing their job, which is to keep salespeople out. And if they don't do their job and you get through, they could actually get in trouble. And their job's pretty unpleasant as it is. Not only could it be hectic and chaotic, but most likely probably doesn't pay extremely well. Although executive assistants can get paid extremely well. I mean, there are some executive assistants that can make almost 6 figures. So very well paid, or could be decently paid, should I say. But some gatekeepers might not be paid well, could be very hectic. Most of this last thought here applies to maybe more front desk receptionists, but difficult job. And on top of it, you are one of many salespeople that they're dealing with. And the harder you try to get through, the harder they're going to have to do their job to get rid of you. And if you happen to be smooth enough to slip past, they could get in trouble. So it's difficult. And you're gonna, you end up butting heads. But as you're butting heads, I would just tell you, don't take it personally. It's just part of the game, and it's not you, and you're not doing anything wrong. They're doing their job, and it's part of the process. And what you need to do is do what you can to make them less unpleasant, decrease their guardedness, and make them feel more comfortable dealing with you and letting you through. And hopefully we've talked about some of those things here today that give you either some ideas that you can build on or some things you can take away.